Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. Every episode, I sit down to talk risk, how to avoid it, how to manage it, and how it impacts our built world. This season, we'll be diving deep into the world of AI and talking its transformative influence on risk management. Over the next 8 episodes, I'll be interviewing a series of experts in the field who will be offering unique insights and perspectives on how AI is revolutionizing the way we approach and mitigate risk. Let's get to it. Hey, David, thank you for joining me on Brick by Brick. We're back in the studio after being at ITC in ERMI. I'm so excited to have you. When I got the opportunity to talk to Chief Safety Officer at Highwire, I jumped on the opportunity. But for those people who might not know what Highwire is or even what a Chief Safety Officer at Highwire does, why don't you give us a little bit of your background and tell us how you got into this role and what's been the journey?
First off, thank you, Jason, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm look forward to talking with you today. So today, as the Chief Safety Officer at Highwire, what I spend a lot of my time doing is working with the asset owners and general contractors and even some of the large specialty trade contractors that use our platform to understand the risks that their contractors present, their subcontractors, their trade contractors present. Those might be safety risks, financial risk, default risks, quality risks, but it's important that clients understand what those risks are so that they can have the conversations they need to ultimately mitigate those risks and make sure that those contractors have successful outcomes. It's really what we call contractor success here at Highwire. So that's a little bit about Highwire and my role here. To talk a little bit about background, I think it's interesting having listened to a lot of your podcasts before in terms of how I ended up in this role, right? I certainly didn't go to my parents at 18 going into college and saying, I think I want to manage risk and I want to do it specifically in the construction industry. That would not be the truth. Sort of evolved into this role over time, right? I was an environmental science major in college, found myself at times out in the woods, counting crickets and grasshoppers, doing biology and ecology and hydrogeology. Didn't really have a clear direction in terms of, what was I going to do with that after college? And nobody's fault but my own at that point, right? But I really started, my first introduction to safety and risk was working as an intern in the EHS department at my school, simply conducting inspections of fire extinguishers at that time, which seemed pretty trivial. But as you look back on it, you really start to think about how that really did impact risk and managing risk. From there, I transitioned and I worked at Massport, which is the operator of Logan Airport and other facilities around Boston. First introduced to construction during that time. Also continued performing ergonomic assessments and indoor air quality investigations and things like that. But really where my understanding of what it truly meant to manage risk started to form was at Harvard University. It's actually where Highwire was founded, and I was part of the construction safety group in Harvard's EHS department. What we were really tasked with doing was helping to manage and mitigate the risks associated with about $500 million of construction that occurred at the university each year. And that meant working collaboratively with the university's capital project directors and project managers, our GCs and CMs, and the trade contractors that were on campus. And I really want to stress the idea of the collaborative approach that we took, because we recognized that to manage risk across all of these complex capital projects, we needed to view our GCs and our CMs and their trade contractors as our partners, because if they were successful, we would be successful. So that was an important mindset that we really held close when we were at Harvard in terms of how we were successful. I think that construction projects, they're just so complex. And one of the things that really draws me or continues to draw me to construction and the industry is that the skill that the tradespeople have that brings these projects to life, brick by brick, right? See what I did there?
Perfect. You're natural.
The amount of, just collaboration and communication that goes into delivering these projects from the design phase all the way through completion, it's just incredible. And when you don't really get to see these projects up close, you just see them from the street, you don't realize it. And it's just such a great experience and industry to be a part of because the things that you get to witness are just amazing. And finally, if you've been in the industry long enough, unfortunately, you've likely experienced some significant incidents along the way. And when they do occur, they really change your outlook. They increase your desire to do more, to drive improvements, to find new ways to reduce risk and avoid those moments where, you're wondering, is the injured worker going to be okay? what is the outcome of this incident going to be? You really want to avoid those going forward. So a little bit of a long background, but I think important to the context of kind of how I view risk and managing risk in a construction environment.
I think you outlined several areas I want to go into for our conversation. And one is a lot of times in risk, especially like frontline risk mitigation becomes the only strategy. And what you're actually talking about is defining risk appetite, defining those things that are not just only mitigated by transfer of risk via insurance, but actually understanding the other elements of your risk matrix and actually diving into those and understanding that even within those, there's degrees of risk that you're assuming. So now, no pun intended, the Highwire act of managing that to do business is what you're describing. I still find that 90% of the conversations I enter into with risk managers have primarily most to do with risk transfer. Do they have the right insurance and are they asking for the right requirements? In the more sophisticated organizations, or I wouldn't even say more sophisticated, but more leaning in on actual risk management philosophy, it is about what you do with the entire risk that's there. And I often use an analogy, and I think you did it too, which is buildings go up every day and we think, okay, this is just something that happened. But it's like making a movie, which is every risk that you produce can make you make a terrible movie or just not as good as you could make, right? And so I think that is an area I want to kind of dive into. So when you talk about how you view risk through the lens of safety and through what are risk managers in construction companies getting right today? And where should they put more emphasis and energy in expanding their capabilities?
That's a great question. I think what you talk about with risk transfer and insurance, obviously a very important part of the puzzle, right? But I will say that the mindset that we had and that a lot of our clients have is that, the moment you decide to build something new or you decide to start a new capital project, you are taking on risk. And with every contractor that you decide to award work to, your risk either increases or decreases. It's important to understand what risks each contractor presents so that you can actively engage those contractors and make sure that they are prepared to deliver for you, whether that comes from a safety perspective, a capacity perspective, ability to meet schedule, all of those different things. And so when you decide to do a project and take on a project, you are taking on risk. And so what I find is that the most sophisticated owners and builders, they recognize that and they are very proactive in mitigating those risks. They don't purely rely on risk transfer and insurance. Like I said, those are important parts, but you have to take an active role.
Yeah, that mitigates maybe some financial risk, but it doesn't mitigate all the other things. The timeline on your project, a hit to your reputation, the ability to continue working with those builders in the future, right? I don't think that saying, oh, well, we hired a bad electrical install person and we will never do it again gives someone enough confidence to continue to work with you on additional projects. I'm seeing that this part of the equation is being put into pre-qual, is being put across the board into how now builders are choosing which firms to use to build their projects. Are you seeing similar trends? Or what are some of the trends that you're seeing that really, that might surprise the average risk manager working, at a $10 million construction company?
You touched on pre-qualification there, and that's an important part of it. And I think an important evolution there is recognizing that pre-qualification is truly just a part of it. It is the beginning. It is not the end, right? Once somebody is pre-qualified and they step foot on site, your job doesn't end. There is continuous engagement, collaboration, monitoring performance. And so that's an important aspect of what we're seeing. Pre-qualification helps you understand risk, but then the next step is to take action to mitigate those risks before work starts and throughout the course of your relationship with a contractor. Because you're right, you can transfer risk, you can think about some of the financial aspects, but if you're a general contractor and one of the trade contractors that you hire has a significant incident on your owner's site, what does that do to your reputation? If one of your trade contractors defaults in the middle of their scope of work and they're on the critical path and the impacts to your owner's projects are significant both in terms of delays and cost, what does that do to your reputation? So there's reputational risk. And of course, there's the risk of a significant incident that impacts somebody's health and well-being, which is really the worst case outcome, right? So we want to do everything that we can to proactively prevent those things from happening, as opposed to relying purely on some of the, risk transfer mechanisms or insurance mechanisms. It's really a holistic approach.
David, one thing I'm interested in, because I have different safety people on here, and some think of safety as academic and some think of it as a personal, as you can only be good at safety if you actually care about people's safety. It's not just the business safety. Where do you come down on that academically? What is your view of what safety is to an organization?
Sorry to say, I have to say that it's both of those things, right? There's the academic nature of it, but I think, again, if you're in the industry for any period of time, you can't help but be affected by personal experiences and things that happen on your jobs. And, unfortunately, I've had a couple of those things. I haven't had any fatalities occur on any projects I've been involved with, but there have certainly been close calls. And as I mentioned earlier, those anxious moments of what is the outcome of this going to be? So there's the academic and there's the business aspects of it, the impacts that poor safety performance can have on your business. It's certainly important, but we have to really honestly care about the workers who are doing that work, the skilled workers who are incredibly skilled in delivering these projects. It kind of has to start there, I think, but that's my perspective.
And one thing that I think about is, often I have people coming on here and saying, as we've expanded our construction work into new regions, we have to go out and find new tradespeople. We're having trouble finding experienced tradespeople. So we're pulling more people in that are not experienced. What is my responsibility for continued education? What's my responsibility to make sure that they get what they need? And it seems to be more so than ever before, the relationship between GC and subcontractor are really becoming community-based, where I see a lot of GCs actually holding events, bringing their subcontractors together for conversation, doing education with them, really trying to build a sense of that. And then I have another set of GCs that are saying, hey, if I could turn over tomorrow and hire all my own people and have all my own staff, I would do that. Where do you come down on that? And I know for every business it might be different, but does that align to what you're seeing? Does that align to, do you have a perspective that you think businesses should aim for?
I think there's a couple of different approaches that people have taken historically. One is I hire the subcontractor. The subcontractor has the expertise. They need to manage their employees and train their employees. It's their responsibility. In other cases, it really is being recognized as a partnership. There are things that we can do as a sophisticated GC and CM to help bring our trade contractors along, to help them improve, identify opportunities for improvement. I think it's important to recognize a challenge that you just mentioned is really the labor shortage issue that is front and center in the industry. And what are we going to do about that? How are we going to manage that? One of the things that I think is important from a pre-qualification perspective is understanding how sophisticated these trade contractors are. How equipped are they to bring on workers who might not have the same level of skill or experience that they're used to? What are they going to do? How are they going to go above and beyond to get those employees up to speed, to pair them with experienced workers, to make sure they have the training that they need to keep the communication lines open? It's a really important issue that is seemingly only going to get worse as the years go on and more construction workers reach the end of their careers. And we've got to attract new workers, and we've got to find the right approaches to make sure that our trade contractors have the safety culture and the sophisticated approach to a lot of different aspects of what they do. But one certainly is onboarding new employees and making sure that they're ready and comfortable in being able to deliver that work safely, recognize the hazards around them, make the right decisions. All those things are incredibly important given some of the challenges that the industry is going to face in the next several years.
Another challenge that risk managers often bring up to me that I think you might be equipped to answer is, how do you create a culture where tracking incidences, not just claims, not just things that actually create problems for your organization, how do you create that culture where that is not only done, but rewarded and becomes part of your organization and your relationship, both internally and with your subcontractors?
It's a really important challenge. There's so much to be learned from incidents that occur on site. There's so much to be learned from exposures exposures that don't necessarily result in an incident, but they could have, right? I'm sure, Jason, you've heard a lot of chatter around the idea of SIFs, right? Serious injuries or fatalities. You may have heard the term sticky, stuff that can kill you. So there's a big shift in the industry trying to get some additional focus on not just investigating recordable incidents, but understanding that there are events or exposures that occur on our job sites every day, if not every week, that have the potential to result in very serious outcomes. We've got to get over this fear that if we report those things, if we investigate those things, there's going to be some form of a penalty. You've got to recognize the project teams, the superintendents, the foremen, the work crews that bring those things to the forefront, that participate in those investigations, that identify corrective actions, sharing of lessons learned. There's a shift that's happening. There's a focus that continues to grow, momentum towards understanding those very serious events or exposures that occur. And I'm really excited about that personally, and it's something we're certainly focused on here at Highwire.
Yeah, one thing that I use as a model is essentially when you are, a pilot, and if you report anything, then you're immune from prosecution in those examples. So it creates a culture of individuals who are looking out for those things and reporting them because it protects them and it's good for the industry. And it took Boeing's having issues right now, but it took an industry that was fairly dangerous even in the 70s and made it fairly safe for 30 plus years. Do you think that there has to be some more work done in those areas in order to create a more safe environment for everyone, and commercially too? I think when we talk about safety, we can talk about the personal side, but the business side is if it's not safe to build things, then people won't want to build things, right? And I think that's something that we don't talk enough about.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, back 20 years ago, when you think about recognition programs or rewarding employees for safety, it had been, we're going to recognize this site or this project because they didn't have an injury. And there were all kinds of challenges with that. OSHA kind of came down on that and said, no, what you're doing there is incentivizing people to not report. I think a really great way is to make a shift, and a lot of companies are doing this today, is to make that shift and recognize people for executing their work safely when you see something, really exceptional in the field, or when you see somebody report something and participate in the investigation and share their ideas for making improvements. Those are great opportunities for recognizing individuals, recognizing work crews, recognizing your trade contractors when they participate in things like that. And yeah, I mean, I think we've got to find additional ways to make the industry appealing. Like I said earlier, it's really exciting when you really think about the things that are built. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible. I remember when I first came into the industry being like, well, why is no one at that job site? And the answer primarily is, well, because there's some kind of investigation or claim that's happening that's keeping people away from doing the work that needs to be done, right? And once you realize that every time one of these things happen, it's not only a delay in the projects, but it's a delay of creating physical places we all live in, it becomes much more personal to every individual in the value chain from my perspective. It's been the gateway that I've kind of fallen in love with the industry.
I agree.
Taking it back to Highwire, because, one of the things that I think Highwire talks about a lot, and I consume the marketing, right, is around financial risk and continuously monitoring financial risk of your contractors, right? Financial health of your contractors. This is a time when something could happen and suddenly that's gone. How have you taken that approach, and what are some of the key elements of continuous monitoring?
We've talked a lot about safety risks so far. Another really important aspect of contractor risk is looking at financials, looking at their default risk. I mentioned earlier that if a contractor defaults, the impacts can be really, really hurtful or impactful to a project. And when we think about a contractor's capacity to deliver, I'll frame it like that. What's really important for companies to be able to answer, especially those companies that are operating an SDI program, subcontractor default insurance, they really need to be able to answer the question, does this contractor have the capacity to deliver on this project? And when I say this project, I mean based on the specific scope of that project, in this specific geography, serving a specific industry like healthcare or pharma or advanced manufacturing, and at this specific contract value. And so those are important questions to answer. And when you identify that there is some risk based on a contractor's financial health or access to liquid assets or based on just how much work they currently have underway, you may still choose to work with that contractor. But at that point, it's important to identify, what are we going to do? What are the steps we're going to take to make sure this contractor succeeds? And that involves continuous monitoring after pre-qualification all the way through construction. I think that a contractor's backlog today could look very different 2 months from now or 3 months from now. It can change very quickly, certainly 6 months from now. So we really need to continuously monitor that as one key factor. We had a client who, and this is kind of going back to COVID when there was a lot of uncertainty, right? A lot of projects were getting delayed during COVID. We didn't even know if projects were going to continue. But this particular client, they had done their due diligence. They pre-qualified the contractor. They looked at their capacity. They looked at their financials. And at the time that they made that award, they were comfortable that that contractor was going to be able to deliver. Now, the project got delayed 6 months, 9 months. And where the failure occurred was they didn't go back and check again to see how that contractor's backlog and their capacity had changed. And it had changed significantly. And that contractor was overstretched. And it began to impact their performance on that project. Now, the contractor didn't default. The client was able to, in quotation fingers here, drag the contractor across the finish line. And that was painful to some extent, but they were able to get the project done. So that's just one example of why it's important to continuously monitor how those things are changing. Even when the contractor is already on site for you performing work, their backlog could change. They could start using more and more of their line of credit, which is an indication that maybe their access to liquid assets or working capital is decreasing. Maybe they've had a significant change in their employee headcounts. And if there are any significant changes like that that occur while that contractor is on your site, or if you end up collecting a new financial statement, are there any new indications of potential risk? It's important to monitor those things all the way through, especially for those contractors where you have identified some level of risk that you're willing to tolerate before you award work to that contractor.
One thing I want to ask is practically, because who is doing and requesting the new information during the project phase? Is it project manager getting involved at certain checkpoints? Is it the coming all from the risk team? Because a lot of teams have a hard time getting out what is required in order to continuously monitor. I think everyone would say, nod their head and go, yeah, that's the ideal state. But I'm pre-qualing someone else over here for another job and I'm not monitoring this. Is this really the role of technology to come in and help create some autopilot around that? And then how do people just not become numb to that and not even pay attention to the results that are happening?
Absolutely. That is an important role that technology will play, right? Project managers, superintendents, project executives, they got a lot going on. Again, I kind of keep coming back to this, but the amount of coordination and just things that they have to manage to deliver a project, they've got a lot going on. And so technology plays a huge role. And, at Highwire specifically, we help our clients evaluate those risks before they make the award, right? But we also have made it very easy for contractors to update their backlog schedules, to make those quarterly updates. We collect those financial statements and we calculate all of the key ratios and trend those ratios over time. And we deliver alerts, right, to those users. What we want to do is deliver the insights to those users, the project managers, the project execs, so that they can take action against them. Now, the other concept that's important is this idea of exception management. And this is really important for those contractors that had risks identified before they started. So there's two aspects of it. One is the risk insights that are delivered by a platform like Highwire. The other is the idea of creating an exception management plan that says, these are the risks we identified from a finance and capacity perspective. These are the things we're going to do. For example, we are going to execute a joint check agreement with the prime tier contractor to make sure that their sub tiers are getting paid. So that's an action that we need to take, and that should be tracked in a management plan or a risk mitigation tracker. In addition to that, on a monthly basis or every pay period, we want to see evidence that those joint checks are being issued. Those things are things that can be tracked in a risk mitigation tracker. You can have expectations that those things are done at a certain date or at a certain frequency. And if those things aren't being done, project teams need to be alerted, because what we hear, one of the struggles is just that. It's the follow through. We can do a good job identifying risks and identifying actions, but are we actually taking them? That's a critical component to all of it.
And so it looks like Highwire or other technology providers building tools that work on the mitigation strategy, not just the alert side, right?
Yes.
In the construction industry, it used to be high point of fidelity. And as the project went on, less and less fidelity on what the at risk actually is, right? So it was all point in time. Highwire, other tools have developed platforms that can identify, hey, the fidelity is going down in this. This is now too risky based on your business and what your appetite is. So that makes sense to me. And now we're in a place of needing to build applets and other things that actually can go out, connect to a bank account, or do all these other kind of operational things. And that brings the center into the conversation around AI and being able to actually process all this large amount of data into something that's digestible. I mean, I know that Highwire works with some very large clients, but some teams are one risk manager, and there's not a reality that where they would be able to do this all on their own. So what role does AI play in your strategy at Highwire or in your belief as an individual in solving, what I would call the last mile?
I don't know. Are people talking about AI in the construction industry?
Yeah, it's mandatory at this point, except I still think that the use cases in saving time and not processing large data sets.
Yeah, I think it's exciting at Highwire. We, a few months ago, really incorporated AI into our platform for the first time. And there's a lot of opportunities to continue to extend the use of it throughout our platform to, look at large data sets, analyze them, deliver more risk insights. But the first thing we did was I spent really the last 12 to 15 months working with a product manager, one of our principal engineers, another safety professional on my team. And what we were doing was we were formulating our approach. We were creating frameworks and instructions. We were building the infrastructure, and we spent a lot of time validating the results before we introduced it into our platform. But our first use case was when we collect safety documents from contractors, safety programs, management systems, policies, and procedures, was developing that framework within which AI will work to analyze those programs for both the content and the quality, and delivering that result, turning that result around to our clients the next day so that they have an idea of how sophisticated is this contractor? Do they have the programs in place that they should based on the type of work they do and the hazards that their employees face? Are their management systems robust? Going back to my point about having the ability to onboard new workers or less skilled workers, management systems are critical to a contractor's ability to do that and to build their safety culture. So that was our first, means of incorporating AI into the platform. The experience has been great. The results have been great. And when you think about what that delivers, it's just not feasible. I tried to do it in my past life, right? Manually reviewing the safety programs that contractors delivered to us. But when you have 100 or hundreds of contractors working on your projects and bidding on your projects, you can't do that. There's no way you could do it. And so what happens is some companies, they just stop requesting them, or they request them, but they don't look at them. And they rely purely on lagging indicators like EMR, total recordable incident rate. And they say things like, well, they're just going to follow our program and they're just going to meet our standards. And that sounds great in theory, but when you think about those workers, it's not your safety culture that is ingrained in them. They haven't been trained to meet your standards. So there has to be a baseline from where they start. And that baseline comes from the company that they work for and the culture that has been built. So, that's the type of a use case for AI. It's not just dropping AI into the platform as a chatbot or anything like that, right? It's using the technology, which is incredibly powerful, building the framework within which it operates, and delivering a meaningful insight that clients can use to take action.
I don't want to get my hand slapped by big insurance because I definitely engage in that. But when you have that mindset that we're just going to force them to follow our thing, the only option you have for mitigation is buying more insurance or having them buy more insurance, which jacks up the price of doing work, which jacks up the price of the chances that you can't enforce it. It's harder to be a police officer than to create a community that is inherently safer. And so I really think that's big. The one thing you just hit on, and this will be my last question before we move into some advice for young people in the industry. What does the insurance industry look like
as they get access to not just historical data, but we get access to real-time data being provided, and we can actually make sense of that. Is that new products coming to market from insurance? Is that reduction in actual insurance ask based on that actual subcontractor on the job site that they're actually doing? Which right now we know that lazy brokers will say, ask for all this stuff. And essentially all you're doing is passing increased costs that's not necessary onto your subcontractors. What does the future of risk transfer look like from your perspective, since it's such a major part of how we deal with risk today? I guess what I would focus on there in what you said is the idea of using data to kind of inform the approach to insurance or to, get better rates or get better premiums. I think that there's something to be said for those trade contractors who take it to the next level when it comes to safety. They're sophisticated in terms of their programs, their performance is really good, and they monitor that performance consistently, and they can demonstrate that they're making consistent improvements that are data-driven. We have clients who have realized better premiums on their OSIPs and on their CSIPs, right? Because they can demonstrate performance over time, and they can demonstrate what's driving that performance, the policies, the programs, the processes that they have in place that are not just pre-qualification and we stop there, but pre-qualification is part of a larger cycle, a continuous cycle that delivers insights that are used to improve every time. And so I think that's where I see probably the biggest opportunity is for contractors, clients to maybe put their best foot forward and realize some better premiums. And it might also provide additional insights to the insurers themselves that they can use. Because one thing that I often see in this and that I'm pretty passionate about is technology and data has looked like in the insurance industry, something we collect. Maybe it goes to, in the case of claims, it gets put into their actuary model and that's how they build prices. But traditionally, insurance goes up every year, regardless of what you do, and all the data and all the facts. And it's great to hear that you have some success stories because as a fellow insurtech person, we can provide data, but that doesn't ever mean that it's really considered unless you're already a big name working with Chubb as an example. And then who knows if that data really is the reason, or it's the fact that you're spending $1 million or $3 million or $30 million with those companies a year. It is sort of like up until this point, technology and data has been looked at as oh yeah, it's cool that we're getting that. But just like jackhammer technology has changed, I think technology as a tool is starting to really emerge as a valuable part of the entire program, not just something that's about saving your people time or filing this thing faster. It's really now starting to be used. And I think that, smart insurance companies and smart organizations that are actually taking advantage of these tools and these improvements will be able to be disruptors in their market, right? And be able to do things quicker, but also be able to do things in a smarter way. Last thing I'm going to ask you, you've been around the block. You kind of alluded to that. You've been in this industry for a while. There's lack of talent in all sides of this. It's amazing to meet a technologist and a safety person doing what you do. But what's some advice you would have for someone that's maybe thinking about coming into our industry? It could be construction, insurtech, it could be insurance, any of those things, safety. What's the piece of advice that you would give to someone that's looking at this to entice them to come through the door and make a career of it? Yeah, I would just really encourage them to really take a serious look at getting into this industry. It's really hard to grasp how exciting it is to be a part of. There's never a dull day. You never have the same day twice. You have the opportunity to form some really incredible relationships with people, with companies. You have a really important opportunity to make an impact and to improve outcomes, whether that is first and foremost, reducing exposures, eliminating injuries, reducing fatality rates. There's so much opportunity. And the mindset that I was really happy that we took at Harvard that really influenced my career in a major way was that you have an opportunity to form partnerships, view it as partnerships, engage, collaborate, share ideas. Again, it's just a really exciting industry to be a part of. So I would say give it some serious thought and you won't regret it. David, thank you for your time today. Thank you for everything you've done in the industry. I have been following you on LinkedIn, so people should go connect with you on LinkedIn. I just think that the way that you approach this, both academically and practically, is really valuable. So thank you for joining me today. I appreciate that, Jason. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to trustlayer.io. And then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.